Okay, I always appreciate a good safety and alignment question. So the postures are side crow and Koundinyasana. And you can see in the next slide what side crow is. So it's basically a twist with an arm balance. And then the question specified Koundinyasana, but since the other posture that I gave an example of is side crow, I would just assume that it meant the second version of Koundinyasana, which is basically taking side crow one step further and straightening the legs in opposite directions. And there's really no simple answer to specify what the shoulders do, what the alignment of the shoulders should be. You still want to make sure, first of all, that your hands are evenly placed. And if one hand goes further forward in front of the other, you're still going to end up squaring your body to match where the hands are. So you would plant your hands as if you were planting them for chaturanga, for example. And the shoulders are kind of a few steps beyond where we actually should be placing most of our emphasis. And that emphasis is on the hands. And so why it's important to always place emphasis on the hands is the same reason that it's important to always focus on foundation. So the hands are to arm balances as the feet are to standing poses. If we take care of the base, everything above the base will be that much better set up. And in my chaturanga post a couple of months ago, you can look back on part 3 of it, I talked about the necessary relationship to the index and middle finger knuckles. And when we bear weight on this part of the hand, what we actually do is we translate most of the supportive force to the radial part of the wrist, this part of the wrist. To really make these points stick into the ground better and control our weight balance and distribution and our posture in the whole sense, we actually have to recruit the use of these two fingertips, but really ideally these fingers especially. Further down the road, of course, you want to try to include all your fingertips. And I'll show you that picture one more time with my hand circled, in that any time, doesn't matter what arm balance you're doing, you really want to start to develop a very firm and tactful relationship to how you relate your hands, which includes your fingertips, your fingers, to the ground. When we do this, we call into action a very important muscle that I outlined in that chaturanga post called the Flexor Digitorum Profundus muscle right here on that anterior portion of your arm. And this muscle extends all the way down through the palm. It's a deep muscle and it goes right into your fingertips. And so when you start to practice and exercise and really just develop the strength of your fingertips you're really developing the entire spectrum of the Flexor Digitorum Profundus. And why that's important is because the Flexor Digitorum Profundus, as implied by the name, it flexes. It flexes the fingers and it flexes the hand. And so when we have this motion translated to an arm balance, what this actually does is it takes the wrist off the ground, or at least it keeps weight off of the ground. So imagine if this was the floor and this is the arm balance hand, if I use my fingertips and I activate that Flexor Digitorum Profundus, see what happens? This happens. But when you're actually in an arm balance and you do this, it prevents your wrist from collapsing into the floor and all of your weight smashing your little carpal bones together. So as you lift in an arm balance like this, right? Because your arms are vertical, they're not going to be parallel to the ground. As you push into the floor with the fingertips and the knuckles, you're actually taking the wrist off the ground. Now, it's not going to be that easy to take the wrist off the ground, but at least we can start to take the weight that's attempting to drop into the wrist off the ground. And you keep it in the stronger part of your support, because we should never drop into the joint. The next slide, I just want to show the difference between doing side crow with a little more straighter elbows and then a little bit more bent elbows, sort of like chaturanga elbows. And so the question is fair enough about what's the alignment of the shoulders. When we're doing chaturanga, because not all of our weight is being supported just in the hands, some of it is shared with the feet and the legs, it's way more important to be considerate about what the shoulders should do, because you can put a lot more load into the legs and then be absent-minded about the shoulders. But when it's just your arms holding you up, really taking care of the base is the most important. And it's really irrelevant when you're just bearing weight only on your hands and your arms. It's irrelevant to think so much about the shoulders and to just first start to build this relationship to the hands. So that's why it seems like I'm not really answering the question, but what I'm really trying to hint at is if you establish the foundation, everything else works better. And because in arm balances, especially these kind of arm balances, you have to know how to distribute your weight. Once your weight is already distributed, once you're actually balanced, your shoulders are already going to be in the correct position, and you can't really readjust your shoulders in an arm balance without readjusting your either hands or your weight distribution. So given that your weight distribution is on point, which means you're balancing, the only real important piece to practice is hand etiquette. That's just foundation etiquette, essentially. So when you first start to do this, instead of practicing it in arm balances, because what are you gonna do? Arm balances for an hour? Use it in chaturanga. I cannot tell you guys enough how often I see people with a pretty good practice, as soon as they start going through the whole vinyasa cycle, and especially as they start to plummet down towards chaturanga, the hands just get destroyed. So in chaturangas, in downward dogs, really just think of like dwelling, just drill it into your muscle memory, how to keep these points on point. And once you get these developed, they'll be there to support you in your arm balances. Thank you.